Okay, we'll call this Audit Committee meeting to order. We have one item on the agenda, and that's our first quarter audit status report. Welcome, Karina.
All right, welcome everyone. So today I'm going to be covering 4 different assurance service reports, including a controls audit of our fire life safety systems and updates for the audit arena, the market, and cash deposits. So just as a reminder that I'm also spending a considerable amount of my time right now in kind of a consulting capacity for the utilities review and the development services review as well. So I'll start with the controls audit of the fire life safety systems. Just for your reference, this can include a combination of features within our buildings that protect us from harm. So things like fire sprinklers, fire alarms, emergency lighting, backflow systems, fire extinguishers, and hoses. So these features can be found in both city and privately owned buildings, but the focus of the audit is really just for our city buildings. This audit was not originally on my work plan, but it arose from work that was done by a fellow auditor at the City of Toronto. The Auditor General presented her audit report on fire life safety systems at a recent auditors conference. Through her investigation, she found that the vendor that they had hired at the City of Toronto to conduct their inspections of their fire life safety systems, which is required under the Ontario Fire Code, was fraudulent in several areas. The company was called York Fire, and they were operating under at least 6 different aliases with fictitious staff and authorizations. After extensive investigation, she also found that the staff who had conducted the inspections were not properly licensed, and they had falsified the inspection reports. The companies also overcharged the city through many duplicate invoices and line items, which they were able to catch by comparing the time of day that was reported on their invoices, which showed that the inspectors were trying to be at 2 different places at the same time. After doing a double check of the city's buildings, it was found that most did not, in fact, comply with the fire code. They ran a parallel investigation through the fire department of private buildings, and they had similar findings. So at the conclusion of her presentation, the Auditor General urged all municipalities to review our own fire life safety system inspection programs to guard against similar fraudulent activity and to ensure the safety of our buildings. So the objectives of my audit were threefold. The first thing is I wanted to confirm which vendor we were using and whether we had in fact used York Fire or one of their aliases. Second, I wanted to assess the vendor selection process to see how we go about choosing the company each year. And then third, that regardless of which vendor we're currently using, I wanted to check to ensure that all of our inspections are up to date and that the billings have been done correctly this year. Overall, the goal, though, was to ensure that we have solid controls in place to ensure that our city buildings are not at risk due to ineffective inspections. What I found was that, yes, in fact, we have used York Fire in the past, about 5 years ago. Staff had reservations about using them at that time during the tender process, but were required to use them since they were low bid. However, the contract was terminated with us because they were unable to meet the response time requirements for the emergency repairs, and they also had other deficient inspections or work. After that, the tender process was revised to allow consideration for past performance. So as long as the vendor hasn't had any past performance issues with us or with others, and they meet all of the licensing criteria, then the contract will be awarded on low bid. As part of the tender package, they are required to provide references and their license numbers for the staff that will be performing the work. The vendor that we currently are using is Troy Life and Fire Safety, and staff have indicated that they are satisfied with the performance to date and that they are much more professional and competent than other vendors that we have used in the past. As a side note, the city has also implemented a requirement that any vendor who performs fire life safety inspections anywhere within the city limits, whether that be for municipal buildings or for private buildings, they must be licensed with the city. So when businesses renew their annual business license with the city, they must prove that their fire life safety system inspections have been done by a vendor that's been licensed with the city. So this helps prevent fraudulent vendors and ensures that they have the proper credentials in place to perform the inspections. With regards to our current vendor, it was found that all of the required inspections have been completed and that staff post and maintain the inspection reports as required by the fire code. I asked them how they know if the staff that are sent by the vendor to perform the inspections are in fact the ones that are listed on the tender and are licensed. They replied that with the current vendor, there are consistent staff that attend each time who have already been vetted with the city. In addition, all visits by the vendor must be pre-approved, which avoids having unauthorized work conducted and invoiced. Although they're not able to attend every single inspection, facilities management staff do periodically oversee the work, just to make spot check that the quality and completeness of the work. Otherwise, when they're not able to attend, the staff who work at the building, such as community center staff or arena staff, are the ones that confirm whether the vendor shows up when they say they're going to. Fire department staff will also do spot checks of the fire life safety systems as part of their public hall license inspections. Again, while this doesn't duplicate or replace the inspections being done by the vendor, it provides some assurance that the work is being done properly. If any deficiencies are found by fire, FM staff are informed. However, there have been no issues with the current vendor, and both FM and fire staff are satisfied with them. And the final piece of my investigation was to review all 97 invoices from 2018 to ensure the accuracy of the billing. Now, I'm happy to report that there were only 2 minor errors found, one duplicate invoice and 1 pricing error, both of which were caught by our staff and credited by the vendor. The amounts were low dollar values and appeared to be honest mistakes rather than an attempt to defraud the city. City staff have a very thorough process to review all quotes and invoices, so it's unlikely that any mistakes will get through. So overall, I'm satisfied with the controls that are in place to select vendors and to monitor invoicing, and I'm satisfied that the current vendor performance is sufficient. Staff should continue to be vigilant, as this is a lucrative industry and one in which fraudulent activity has gone unchecked for many years. I'm recommending that I repeat this audit periodically, in particular when either our current staff or the vendor changes at a minimum every 5 years. Are there any questions on this audit?
Any questions? Going once, going twice. Sorry? Okay, for some reason, it's not working. Sorry, folks. Wait till Jeff. You can turn it off and turn off and on. No. I will go in manually. So John, you're on in just one sec. I can't even turn them on. Well, let me try this. Let me try manual. Nothing's working. Well, no, because... Just hang on one sec. Well, I think we need to get this fixed for the system anyway. Okay, we'll have to reset, so just 2 minutes. We will pause for station identification.
Maybe seemed that 45% were incorrect, but really it only turned down to the 1 duplicate invoice and the 1 pricing error, which were both caught by staff and credited by the vendor.
Okay, so in the end, you have no concerns. Does our fire department do this kind of work?
So they do it for other buildings. So they will do it as part of. They will do they do inspections if they need to as part of the spot checking for the public hall licenses. So any of our buildings that have a public hall license.
Why don't they do it for all our buildings?
They would need a lot more staff to be able to do that. They've told me they do have a fire inspection, fire prevention section within the fire department, but they do not have enough staff to do all of these inspections. And then any of the other piece of work that this vendor also does is any emergency repairs. So if the lights are not functioning or the fire alarms are sending messages that they're not functioning properly, this company is on call to come in and correct anything that needs to be fixed.
Have we ever looked at the possibility of doing it all in-house?
I haven't myself, but I have talked to the fire department, and they had said that at one point they had, and that it was more cost-effective to contract this work out.
Okay. My final question is, when there seems to be problems around, we know from the billing side and all that everything is okay. How do we know that they actually did what they're supposed to do after seeing what's happened in Toronto? We know the billing is straight, but...
So we have some assurance in terms of FM periodically does attend the inspections, and so they know what they're supposed to be looking for and that the amount of work that should be done. Also with the fire department, when they do the public hall licenses, they're also checking to see, they don't check everything, but they do spot checks of certain pieces of the equipment, and they have assured me that they're satisfied with the quality of work and that these folks are actually licensed and that they know what they're doing.
Okay, if this equipment isn't functioning, is there some kind of an indication to us that it isn't functioning?
A number of the pieces of equipment that are electronic will have different error codes, but certainly things like fire hoses wouldn't tell you that they're not working unless you've inspected them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kind of a general question. Are we always obligated to go with the lowest price then on a bid? Is that sometimes how we run into situations like this?
I don't know the purchasing bylaw inside and out, but I know that that is generally the starting place, but there are different types of purchases that we make that have different rules. I know with this one in particular, it was, we can look at past performance as an indicator as well.
Okay, and I think it's great that you were able to get this information from the City of Toronto. Is there a way is this just something that we kind of happened upon, or is there a way of finding out? Many municipalities would use the same contractor for a number of different services, I would assume. Is there a way of getting that kind of information out if something like this happened in a different area?
Yeah, so I'm a member of the Municipal Internal Auditors Association. We meet twice per year, and we all share the audits that we're working on and findings that we've had. And so that's where this one came up, was that she was alerting us that we should be looking for this. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and that's great that you have that system to share that information with others. Thank you.
Thank you. This is just kind of tagging on to Councillor Gazzola's comments on taking it to 1.5 for the non-city facilities. I don't know if you were able to answer this or not, but with regards to non-city facilities, do they inspect licensed lodging homes? And is
yes.
it included in this study?
Not including in my audit, no. I believe that there is a mechanism in place, whether fire department actually inspects themselves or whether they require that the lodging house owner provides proof that they've used one of these vendors that has been licensed with the city that's qualified to do the inspections.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I just wonder if we could ask Mr. Lautenbach to update us on the purchasing bylaw and if there are potential changes to make sure that future tenders, with sensitive areas that are in sensitive, areas like this, like fire safety, could potentially be more bulletproof. where we might be able to look at having the contractor's previous record be a factor in our decision about awarding tenders?
Through the Mayor, through the purchasing process, certainly there are requirements that are put on things like tenders, or if it's a proposal that's being done, to look at things like experience, make sure that they meet sort of the minimum requirements that would be expected for the type of work that's supposed to be performed. In the case of a tender, it is lowest compliant bid, so it would depend on what the specifications of that tender would be. But certainly in terms of performance and monitoring sort of vendors as they carry out work for the city, there is language in the bylaw that does allow for the department to bring concerns forward, to evaluate vendor performance, and then to make decisions based on that. And so it is left up to the department as well to monitor sort of the quality of work that's being performed related to the vendors that are selected.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions we have.
So moving on, the remaining reviews that I'll talk about today are all status updates. And the purpose of all of these status updates is simply to hold staff accountable for addressing audit findings and implementing the recommendations. It's a check-in to see that what's still outstanding and whether there are any issues that have not seen progress and need to be escalated to senior management. They are not intended to be a full re-audit of the subject matter and really just consist of stakeholders providing me with details of the status of each of the recommendations and what was done, and some commentary regarding any benefits which have been achieved by implementing the recommendations. If I feel that there hasn't been sufficient progress or that the actions taken don't adequately address the underlying issue, then I will make further recommendations, which could include a repeat full audit of the area. The intent of my presentation today is not to go through all of the original recommendations, but rather to give you a snapshot of the progress and some key benefits, as well as my overall assessment of the progress to date. So I'll take you through all three now, and I'll start with the audit and arenas. So the original audit was a comprehensive review of the audit and arenas division, and this was included looking at the services that they provided, some of the processes where they were experiencing pain points, their resourcing, and the culture within the division. The findings were very positive overall, with only minor recommendations to improve processes and communications, to address some of their key risks, and to improve the staff culture. 33 of the 36 recommendations have been implemented. One is still in progress, which relates to creating training manuals for each position, and 2 are no longer required. There were several improvements that were implemented related to communication, staff training, technology upgrades, financial analysis, and having more of a focus on goals. These resulted in several benefits to the corporation, including staff being more empowered to have more accountability and ownership for problem solving, an improved work culture and team dynamic, and having a greater focus on creating and sticking to action plans. All of these things translated into better customer service for our patrons, user groups, and show promoters, as well as better communication and collaboration with internal stakeholders. So I'm satisfied that the appropriate action has been taken, and I don't feel that any further follow-up on this topic is required at this time. Are there any questions on this one?
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go back to memory. We had 35, 36 recommendations, and is it fair to say that recommendations are problem areas, or?
They were problem areas at the time of the original audit, which was back in 2014.
Can you just remind me of a couple of the largest, the most important ones?
Sure. So one of them, as I said, the one that was still in progress was creating training manuals for each position to allow for cross-training. There was a number of recommendations around communication, so staff weren't feeling that they were tied in enough to what was happening at the management level and being able to reach a dispersed workforce. There were a number of things related to improving the culture as well within the division. Some of the recommendations were related to how they budget and explain the cost of running arenas. So they weren't at that time considering the costs of FM costs there was just what was in the arena's budget. What else here?
Okay, that's fine. That gives me a bit. Thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor Vivanovic. No question at all. I just want to say that I can vouch for these improvements being made. I arrived for Ranger games quite early, and there's stakeholder meetings with the auditorium staff that involve the Rangers, the catering, the restaurant people. They're going over possible scenarios that might happen and how they might address them. It's around the corner. I can see the ice maintenance crew getting together to go over what might possibly come up that night. So there's some good planning and good communication going on there, so I just wanted to point that out.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. This kind of relates to, actually, maybe something I can't talk about. I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to the next one.
All right. Okay, so the next status report is for the market. And the original audit was an organizational structure and resourcing analysis review. So the market was struggling with workload at that time. So the purpose of the review was to get an objective third-party opinion on resourcing needs and make any other recommendations on how they could decrease their workload. So it was found at that time that additional staff was required and a part-time program assistant was recommended. It was also recommended that some of the duties be redistributed amongst the staff to remove some of the administrative tasks from the manager and allow her to focus more effort on strategic planning and growing the market. This would also help staff to be able to take their lunch breaks, which they were unable to do at that time due to excessive workload. It was also recommended that they continue to monitor and track their capacity once the program assistant had started to determine if any other changes were needed. So 14 of the 15 recommendations were implemented and one is no longer required. And that was just simply related to one recommendation, which was requesting union approval to allow some of the Series 9000 staff the ability to enter program registrations. So that was one of those things that would take some work off of some of the other staff. It's no longer required because we now have self-registration that patrons can go in and register themselves online. By redistributing duties, adding the program assistant, streamlining some of their administrative processes, and ensuring that the manager got improved senior management support, the market has seen several benefits, including increased revenues as a result of having more staff capacity to run more events and classes, better coverage to enable all staff to regularly take their lunch and breaks, more time for managers to identify and discuss new strategies for the market and proactively mitigate risks, an overall improvement in employee morale due to the more reasonable workload for all, and streamlined processes for event and rental bookings. So I'm satisfied with the progress and don't feel that any further follow-up review is required at this time. Are there any questions on this one?
Councillor Gazzola.
On 1.7, you set out the staff complement in 2013. What does it look like in 2019?
Just one second here. So currently they have the manager, they've added a supervisor of the market position in, they've got the 2 office staff and 1 part-time program administrator, that was the one that was recommended, and the custodian plus all of the part-time staff that run the market on the Saturdays.
So if you were to add those up, what are the number of people involved now? Like it was 4 and 2 is 6, 1 is 7 and 13. What is it still?
So they're full-time staff, manager, supervisor, 2 staff, and 1 custodian is 5 plus the part-time program admin. The 13 part-time staff are all Series 9000.
So there's less people?
So there's 2 additional positions, the supervisor and the part-time program assistant.
Okay. When you talk about increased revenues, how about bottom line? Like increased revenues by themselves are fine, but if our costs are higher, what's the bottom line look like?
Of course, you asked the question I didn't bring the numbers
That's
for.
okay. It's
Their
okay.
revenues went up by 11.3%. I'll tell you.
Sometime if you could
Yep.
answer that. Thank you.
Okay, those are all the questions we have. Do you want to move on to the last one, cash deposits?
All right, so with cash deposits, the purpose of the original audit was to assess the controls around cash handling for all of our locations that accept cash as a form of payment. Now, it was found at that time that most locations did have adequate controls in place to protect cash from theft, either from the public or from employees. This included point-of-sale systems and other manual reconciliation processes, which ensured that all funds being collected for goods and services was properly recorded and protected. The areas which did have control weaknesses had low dollar risk. However, I did make specific recommendations for each location, which, if implemented, could tighten the controls even further and prevent theft. Given the low dollar values in some locations, in some cases it was more cost-effective to accept the risk of theft rather than spend money on implementing controls. 50 of the 67 recommendations are complete. 2 are still in progress, and 15 are no longer required due to changes in service offerings. So, for example, many locations used to sell bus tickets. So there were several recommendations to implement an inventory tracking process to ensure that all tickets were accounted for. However, many locations no longer sell the bus tickets, so those recommendations are no longer required. While it is encouraging to see that most of the recommendations have been fully implemented, I'm recommending that I do another complete cash deposits audit within 2 years' time frame, as processes do change over time, and it's important to validate that the controls are still adequate. Are there any questions on this?
Councillor Gazzola.
I'm just curious as to how much cash is involved within the city now. I mean, where do they take in? Where do they actually deal in cash?
I believe the number was, at least at that time, I haven't revalidated the numbers, but at the time I did this, we take in $7.3 million of cash per year.
And does that include taxes? Would that include taxes, or is that all supplementary cash?
That's all just cash sales at, I don't, actually, hold on. Let me see if revenue's on this list. Yes, so 4.1 million of that is revenue taxes.
It's tax, so we're really dealing with $3 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, those are all the questions we have.
Great, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Davey, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We will start up at 4 o'clock downstairs.